This podcast contains content that may be triggering, so please practice self-care, knowing that you can stop, pause, and regulate at any point. In our description, you'll find a free resource to help you do just that, to ground throughout your listening experience. Today, we are joined by Dr. Singley, who is the founder of the Center for Men's Excellence and a San Diego-based board-certified psychologist and director with over 20 years of clinical experience. His research and practice focus on men's mental health with a particular emphasis on reproductive psychology and the transition to fatherhood. In 2020, Dr. Singley expanded his practice to include other like-minded clinicians who specialize in providing structured, technique-driven, evidence-based practices with an emphasis on men's psychology and relationships. I have to also just note a few key accomplishments here that I think are really important and significant. One includes winning the American Psychological Association's 2017 Practitioner of the Year Award. Also being the former president of the APA's section on positive psychology, and the current president of the APA's Division 51, Society for the Psychological Study of Men and Masculinities. Dr. Singley also served on the President's Advisory Council for Postpartum Support International, co-authored Parental Mental Health Factoring in Fathers with PSI's co-founder Jane Honigman. We also see that Dr. Singley developed Postpartum Support International's foundations in paternal perinatal mental health, and along with some colleagues, developed and founded International Fathers Mental Health Day, as well as a grant-funded basic training for new dads, Inc. And so there's just a wealth of experience and knowledge, and as I can, just so much collaboration in finding ways to bring fathers into the conversation. And so I'm so thankful that you said yes to being here. Dr. Singley, welcome to Be the Bloom.
Thank you. I was thrilled when you reached out, honored to be here. I'm like listening to that intro. I'm like, that dude sounds busy. Wait a second.
Yes, right. But it's all amazing, amazing stuff. And I wonder, if you could share with us a little bit about the story that brought you to your work.
Yeah, so top level, I am not a survivor of PMADS. That's not how I came to it, nor's my wife. We have two boys now, 20 and 18. And really, the way that I describe myself professionally is that I am an expert in the psychology of men and masculinities, and within that, my research and where I have the strongest kung fu is in early fatherhood and paternal perinatal mental health. But the way that I got into it was kind of serendipitous, actually. Like, I went to University of Maryland for grad school, and to do the PhD in psych, you leave your home institution, you go somewhere else to go do a pre-doctoral internship. And I matched at UC San Diego. And when I got there, a lot of times these internships have professional development speakers that come in and talk about different aspects of the field. And so within the first 3 weeks or so, we had a local psychologist who's now a very good friend and mentor of mine. His name's Jeff Jones, who came in and talked about early fatherhood and the psychology of men. And at the time, I had a 3-week-old baby. And I was pretty focused in grad school on like a variety of different research topics, but the biggest me-search one was whiteness and white racial identity development as one dimension of my identity. But for whatever reason, I didn't even think about the gender thing, which actually tracks. Like
Mm,
when you're a member of a group that has a lot of privilege, one of the first things you tend to do is you don't think about it.
mm,
Right. And
mhm,
so I went hard on the whiteness thing, but not so like not at all on the gender thing. And when Jeff came and talked to our cohort, it dawned on me that you have to take a gender class in grad school.
mm,
Our gender course covered every aspect of gender except for cis masculinity.
mm, mm,
And that's not just my program, that's most programs. And so I felt a little self-conscious, like, oh man, I wasn't even looking at that, like my fatherhood role identity or salience or any of that. And so Jeff came and talked and kind of like blew my mind. And I was like, okay, man, I gotta get my degree. But once I do that, I'm gonna cold call you. And I did. He gave me his card
mm,
and did my internship, finished postdocing, and then I cold called Jeff and said, all right, man, I want to do this fatherhood thing. Help me. And he did. He took me under his wing and helped me to apply for, at that time, there was first five money. It was like old
mm,
tobacco litigation money that was still being put out. And I got an innovative program award to develop the expectant dads class. And at that point, I was still working in like tech and different corporations. I've had sort of a weird career on that front. But as I moved ahead, at some point, my wife took me aside and said, dude, you're scattered.
mm,
She got an MBA, right? So she like sat me down and gave me the most helpful coaching advice ever. She said, you're scattered. You're doing whiteness. You're doing online methodologies. You're doing men's
mm,
issues. You're doing fathers. You're doing like different sorts of consulting and positive psych and so forth. And she was like, don't go work for anyone else. You need to just do your thing. And it has to
mm,
be about men and fathers. Otherwise, you have to stop that research, get off of that committee, only men and fathers. And I was like, that is 100% correct.
mm.
And I did that. And her sense of confidence in me and her certainty about this direction really kind of springboarded me into it. And from there, it was doing, like, I'm sort of weird in that I do research, but I'm not an academic.
I
All
love
the other
that.
people on my
Yeah.
research team are. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
No, that is, yeah, it is rare. And yet we need more people who are practitioners doing that research. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, people talk about evidence-based practice, but there's also practice-based evidence, which
Yeah.
is a big part of what my team does. And so I guess just to put a final point on, so I then started getting introduced to the San Diego Psychological Association. There's a men's issues committee, the APA, there's a division on the psych of men. And then I got involved with Postpartum Support International. I mean, I think it was like 2008 or nine or something. And
Mm.
Wendy Davis called me up and was like, hey, we want to talk dads. And she basically was like, join or else. Um, Not really. She's kinder than that, but the message is clear. And it was from there that I've really sort of found professional homes in the APA and SDPA and Postpartum Support International, as well as the Marseille Society and some other groups. But it's very much become my professional identity to focus on men's issues broadly, and within that to really go deep on the early fatherhood stuff.
Mm. Mm. Thank you for sharing like your trajectory and how you
Mhm.
came to this work. Um, I wonder what you've found are some common themes or patterns or experiences that men are having on the journey to fatherhood that maybe aren't commonly paid attention to or recognized. I mean, I'm
That's a big
guessing
question.
there's so many.
Yeah. Well, so to step back and kind of take the macro perspective, I realize there's
Mm,
a lot going on in our country now around gender and men and women and queer and trans and gender nonconforming folks. Um, Writ large, where we are right now, um, we're 50 years post Title IX.
mm,
And very importantly, I guess what, like 60 years post the release of the birth control pill. If you ask me, it's the birth control pill and Title IX that came together to do the
mm,
most to elevate, to set the stage to elevate women and girls
Mm.
more. And I'm certainly not trying to paint a picture of an equal playing field here, but I will say that as we've been moving ahead, the evolution of female gender and femininity in our country has involved incorporating aspects that have been taught to think of as traditionally masculine.
Mm.
So we've got, women on the Supreme Court. There are not enough women CEOs of Fortune 500 companies and just in other, and that those bring with them all sorts of nuance and considerations. As that's been happening, the traditional sort of domestic duties that again we were taught to think of, this is mothers and this is women's work, that
Mm.
hasn't gone anywhere. It still needs to get done.
Mm-hmm.
And for that reason, men have certainly moving into the parental period and fatherhood have pretty much had to step up in different ways to
Mm.
be involved in caring for children, domestic care, and engaging in activities that we've traditionally thought as feminine. That brings it with it its own gender role conflict difficulties. For some dads, it's pretty natural. For others, it's really tricky and like
Mm.
anxiety driven avoidance and shame and so forth. So to me, like the backdrop of this is, like it or not, the meaning of what it is to be male, and within that, what it is to be a father
Mm.
continues to evolve. And
Yeah.
all kinds of caveats to this next statement in terms of, culture, ethnicity, like different countries. But generally speaking, fathers are expected to be more involved than any previous generation. And what that looks very different for
Mm.
different people. Um, one of the trends that I see, actually two related ones. One is dads will commonly tell me in the birth in the sort of prenatal birth and the immediate postpartum, um, I wanted to be more involved and I tried to show up, but I felt invisible.
Mm.
And what I find really interesting about that point is for plenty of these guys who are saying this, they look like me. These are fairly entitled, like upper, class white dudes that have not experienced even
Mm.
tacit marginalization.
Mm.
And so going into like a prenatal visit and then the tech won't look at you, or
Mm.
the doctor doesn't want to answer your questions and they just direct things back to the birthing parent. These are dads that wanted to be in on it.
Mm.
And so that sense of invisibility, or this isn't for me. My colleague Sonia Malloy on my research team did a phenomenal qualitative study where she looked at Appalachian fathers and caregivers and care providers and parent educators for them. But the title of the paper is called "It's Not Girly," and
Mm.
basically looking at fatherhood. But one of what she found in that study was there's a very mixed message where folks say, fathers, you need to be involved. And when you drill it and ask about the involvement, the sense is, "Oh, you just need to be there.
Yeah.
You don't need to do anything in particular." And then fast forward 2, 3 years down the line, and he's got a partner that's saying, "Hey, second shift, mental load, emotional load. I don't want a direct report. I want an equal co-parent." And for that, I come back and say, okay, when was the first time when someone told this dad he's really important and central and he has
Mm.
something to offer?
Mm. Mm.
Obviously there are all kinds of different family concepts, but like this is, you asked for themes. That is
Yeah.
very much a theme in
Yeah.
in what I see happening.
Yeah, which, I think back to when I was having my own kids, and I think about all of the different videos I would watch and all of the different emails I would get, and they would be directed to me. And I noticed that none of these were actually involving or bringing in the parent who's non-birthing, right? None of it is addressing directly dads or fathers. And so I hear you on, like, there is this invisibility and you can feel like you're not invited to the party, um, and to the experience of what it means to to bring this child forward. I wonder, you mentioned there were two. Is there another theme that you're noticing come forward?
So the related point is most of the dads that I see have a sense of I need to be involved. It's not cool to be
Uh,
uninvolved, right?
mm,
However, this is what I think of as the fatherhood generation gap. Because there, if you look around on social media or traditional media, you rarely see positive modeling
mm,
of fathers of babies and infants. We see it
yes.
more with fathers of older children, and great, perfect, keep doing that.
Mm,
However, for these fathers that are like, bro, I'm in, like I want to do this, like
mm,
I'm stoked, like and then they get to it and it's stressful, and they don't have a clear model or a script about how to do it.
mm,
Oftentimes that uncertainty or the stress or the anxiety of the transition causes them to sort of unexpectedly have anxiety driven avoidance where
mm.
they're not stepping in, they're not soothing, swaddling, diapering, bathing, and all the things.
Yeah.
And they're not seeing it. And this does pull in the related gender role conflict piece,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like if you look cross culturally, one of the top tenets of traditional masculinity, this is a very important point. Traditional masculinity is anti-femininity,
Mm-hmm.
which doesn't mean you hate women. It means
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is to be feminine in your culture, the number one way to be traditionally masculine is to not do that.
Yeah.
Right. So there's kind of a reactive nature to the masculine platform that the fatherhood identity tends to sit on.
Mm,
And that's another key element that oftentimes is insidious that these dads are like, well, I'm not trying to do that. Like, I mean, and it's like, on the one hand, I have this image of being involved and being in there. And when the rubber meets the road and it's time to stay in, it's time to, carry that baby bag across the parking lot. It's time to change that baby's diaper on the floor of the plane, like all the rest, it's like, well, like, that's just it. And so that's another, that generation gap thing and the lack of modeling combined with the expectation of greater involvement is really tough.
So there, I mean, there's a confluence of challenges that folks are facing that actually counteract each other, right? There's all these mixed messages I'm hearing you speak to. So the idea of be
Mhm.
involved. It's cool to be involved, but also from partner. Like I want you to be involved. And yet, well, where's the space for me? How do I get into this? How like where's the room? And then the piece around masculinity and the messaging there and needing some guidance in how to be involved but not having it. It makes me wonder if then is it then what we all as humans tend to do is default to what we know.
Right.
And you spoke to avoidance, and I also think about what about the models that were or were not set for those men in terms of what fatherhood looked like and how they were fathered, parented.
Yeah. So this to me, we could take a long time
I
on this
know
one
it's
if you let me. Well, but part of the reason, but I see, okay, back to my earlier point. This is controversial.
mm,
Talking about gender, talking about supporting men, talking about how fathers struggle inevitably gets eye rolls.
mm,
Guys have all the power, guys have all the privilege. Toxic masculinity, if you're pro fathers, you're anti mom, and so forth, and none of that's not certainly none of that's true in my case.
mm,
um what what I find to be important for folks to understand is that when you put all the rhetoric aside, what the research in this area shows is that masculinity is not problematic per
mm.
se. Like masculinity is not inherently toxic. I do a lot of training
Like
and I'll
on
be
its
like,
own, it's
okay,
not, yeah.
like, I'm a word association, masculinity, and easily half the responses are, toxic, right? And
Mm,
while I understand that, it's important to understand that what the research shows is it isn't being male or maleness or
mm, mm,
masculinity or
mhm,
paternity that itself it tends to be problematic. And this is the subtlety. It is being rigid about only being that traditional masculine, stoic, independent, successful,
Mm,
aggressive. These are
mm,
all traits which
mhm,
have very, very helpful and beneficial contexts and outlets, including in fatherhood.
mhm,
The problem is when that same guy, that same dad, can't go from being, I'm a like hardcore aggressive in this contract negotiation, but then I go home and I'm
mm,
trying to like get my partner to ask, how high while jumping on the way up. I'm like, that's not gonna work, dude. Like,
mhm, mhm,
there are other contexts when the way that the really most strategic, most the healthier way to show up is to be able to show empathy, to have compassion, to accept influence, and also to be hardcore traditional dude over here. This is why, like, my whole thing is the healthiest men
mm,
are able to show balance and flexibility
mm,
in how they show up. And this gets magnified in early fatherhood, in part because the way that I see it, early fatherhood is the tip of the spear in
mm,
terms of the sort of ongoing evolution of masculinity. Virtually no one, and this isn't a political thing or a sociological thing, this is kind of a basic fact. Virtually no one looks at early parenthood, early fatherhood, and is like, dude, it's cool not to be involved. It's like, whatever. Like, the general sense is, nah, like, people, and what that looks like is different.
mm,
And I think it's critically important to acknowledge that one of the aspects of paternal masculinity that has changed for the better is that fathers are now much more than ever encouraged to be involved, to change diapers, to wear their babies, to be caring, to be caregiving, which was exclusively the purview of moms
mm,
for the longest time. Now, excuse me, like, again, where I'm coming from is if we take this from a lifespan perspective and bearing in mind what I said earlier about balance and flexibility, and it's not a feminine side to be empathetic.
yeah,
That
yeah,
isn't a gendered experience. We gender it, but it's not inherently that, right?
mhm,
Things like empathy and compassion and so forth.
yeah,
Well, what I'm hoping in the work that I do is we're working to develop models and programmatic interventions that take that normalization, the permission that we give fathers to be
mm,
caring and caregiving with their babies,
mm,
and then expand that as they move through life to acknowledge that they can also be caring and caregiving and allow for others to be caring
mm,
and give them care throughout their lives, basically to normalize. You
mm,
can be hardcore and caring. And if you do both, you're going to live 6 years longer. You're going to get divorced less. You're going to have less depression. You're going to have fewer relationship problems, higher life satisfaction, and the
mm.
list goes on.
Oh, it almost sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, but it sounds like there's something about this permission piece with the child, with their specific child, that can become the offshoot of what it means to create that balance in life, and that you support folks in finding the way to do that, to kind of expand that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I said it in about 1,000 words, and you said it much more, much more parsimoniously. Yes,
Well, I
agreed.
wanted to make sure I got that because that
Yeah.
just sounds so amazing, because oftentimes, thinking about the role of reparenting yourself when there's been a rupture in that original parenting relationship, that so much the focus is that adult child and that um that parent, that they may not have had a certain need met or what have you, right? And so there might be a repeat in the ways in which they parent. And so there can be a lot of focus on that, instead of what I'm hearing from you is, no, actually, it's about how this parent-child relationship in the now helps to inform all the types of flexibility that can be created in the future.
I mean, that's the mission, that's the hope,
Yeah.
and I see it happening slowly. The problem is we're swimming upstream against the bro code.
Mm,
And when you think about it, like adhering to that traditional masculinity and doing it, really the function of it is to help guys to avoid shame, to avoid feeling weak, less than, vulnerable, and so forth. And
Mm,
so the rub is, in order to enact this more balanced, healthier type of masculinity as fathers, you're going to have to sit with some of that internal stress or distress related to doing things differently than probably your own dad did,
mm-hmm.
or father
Mm-hmm.
figure, or whoever.
Yeah. So then let's complicate this a little bit, right? Because
Let's do it. I'm a psychologist. I'm all about overcomplicating.
yes, let's do it. And you know, at Cactus in Bloom, where we very much know that there is a level of invisibility, under resourcing for survivors who've experienced childhood sexual abuse and sexual violence in adulthood, and
Mhm.
even within that, when we think about the reproductive times in folks' life, there's even less care at that intersection. And then when we think about there's even less
Mhm.
care, I would say, when you think about the non-birthing parent, or when you think about the dad or the father or the parent who is a same-sex partner but is non-birthing, right? So
Mhm.
I'm wondering, for you, your experience in seeing the intersections of both being a CSA survivor or a sexual violence survivor as an adult and being moving into fatherhood.
So, for people of any gender who have experienced trauma, abuse, neglect, um, in their family of origin, and certainly those who've experienced sexual violence or sexual assault, when you start looking at the onset of the reproductive period. So to me, a lot of times this begins with, if they're if they're trying to have a child, it's they don't have a kid yet, they're not pregnant yet, they're looking at the prospect of it.
Mm,
And oftentimes that brings up very visceral aspects of, we're talking about having a little one, and my experience as a little one was really rough, and usually involves developing through resilience certain kinds of coping strategies, which are helpful until they're not.
mhm,
And so one when you just think about like male gender in particular, for people, but in particular for males, opening up about trauma, about sexual assault, about domestic violence, being perpetrators of, as well as being victims of. These are places where the whole "men, I don't want to talk about it" thing gets really ramped up.
mm,
And uh, so it's, as a related point, um, I have seen a significant increase. I haven't seen any research on this, frankly, not solid.
yeah.
Um,
And we know the
Increase
research
in,
needs.
well, yeah, believe me, there's holes in the research all over the place,
Mm-hmm.
but of fathers who present postpartum, usually postpartum, not during the pregnancy, with acute stress disorder. Like, so the progression is from acute stress, and if it doesn't resolve, then it blossoms into PTSD. But
Mm-hmm.
I've seen an increase in fathers who experience acute stress into PTSD from totally medically uncomplicated pregnancies and births.
Mm,
Right? It's one thing if you're the non-birthing partner and you're standing there and you weren't ready mentally for a C-section, or for, level 4 tear, or these sorts of things, right? These
mm,
things are stress, like, no matter what. But for a lot of these dads, the experience of having trauma, of abuse, of neglect, and in particular around sexual and family of origin experiences, puts them into a mind frame when they're there at the birth. And really the essential ingredients for trauma are, it's terrifying, it's not under my control, I can't leave the situation, which nicely describes what these
Mm-hmm.
dads in many cases are experiencing, but doesn't get into the really sort of the complexity or the nuance of what this brings up for them, trauma history or not, violence history or not. But those factors I have certainly seen ramp up the level of distress and difficulty and avoidance and re-experiencing, and just
Mm.
as an example.
Yeah, yeah. And so then how do you notice that shows up in parenting, if at all?
Well, sometimes early on, because I realize I'm kind of maybe overly indexing on PTSD, but one of the ways that I'll see this play out with dads is avoidance. I mean, again, top level, what do we do with anxiety? We try to avoid the anxiety provoking stimulus. And so for these dads, sometimes the anxiety provoking stimuli include the baby itself,
Mm.
or the hospital, or the birthing center, or the place in their home where the birth happened. Or it's funny, like, flying in the face of the myths about, women need a reason to have sex and men just need a place. Like, that really gets turned on its head in, frankly, a lot of different contexts.
Mm.
But here in particular, where men are like, I associate my wife's vagina with some of that trauma. So I've seen dads that
Mm.
are really struggle with, wait, I'm supposed to want to be a sex machine and try to get it, but at the same time, like, that's actually part like, that is triggering for me.
Yeah.
In these cases, certainly in the majority of cases, that isn't. It's funny. I talk with a lot of dads. We teach these expectant dads classes, and one of the things we talk about is
Mm.
what I call the uptown versus downtown conversation. If you're going to do vaginal
Mm.
birth, you will be uptown by the head or downtown on the business end of things. And there's
Mm.
no right or wrong, but the question is, first, why? And
Yeah.
secondly, are you and your partner aligned?
Mm.
Like, that to me is one of the bigger questions, and the ones that are like uptown for sure, uptown. I'm like, why? When you kind of boil it down, they're like, I'm worried. My partner's worried that they might not seem sexy to me anymore because a whole lot more than just a baby coming out.
Mm.
And I'm
Yes.
worried that I might be stuck with this mental image,
Mm.
and all of a sudden I won't see my partner, in a sexual way. And that is usually not the case. That's very much the exception to the rule. And so the
Mm.
example I'm giving you about PTSD is more about dads that's one way that it'll play out. And then, of course, it has relational implications for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's so important to even to note that, right? Because I know one thing that doesn't typically happen is, the dads don't always get the assessments to check
Oh, yeah.
in on their mental health, right? To check in on, if they are dealing with postpartum depression or anxiety. And so to be able to note that, hey, this is something that shows up for some folks, might speak to someone out there who's really dealing with that. Um, you spoke to avoidance, and avoidance seems to be like a present theme, and we know that's one of the ways that trauma can show up for folks. I know in my work, a lot of what I see is survivors who, when they have their child, often feel as if um, they are very hyper vigilant against themselves and very concerned against themselves because of what happened to them, and doing certain things like um, giving their child a bath or changing diapers, or all of those things can be very incredibly triggering for them.
Mhm.
And so when I hear you say, yeah, avoidance shows up in some of these key areas, it tracks with a lot of avoidance instinct that shows up for survivors in really trying to protect that child. So do you notice that this avoidance is in part on protecting that child or their family from whatever's coming up for them?
Oh, certainly in anxiety spectrum disorders, PTSD, generalized
Mhm.
anxiety, OCD, specific phobia, like adjustment. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Like, that's a fairly typical human's response that just gets taken to an extreme. And it's tough, right? Because so let's say in the case of someone who has obsessive compulsive disorder, and the fixation is around contamination,
Mm.
let's say, or illness type thing. It's very difficult if you don't have a grounding in this kind of work, when somebody's saying, look, I'm doing what I'm doing because we have to do everything we can to keep this baby safe.
Mm.
And the reality is that's not true.
Mm.
There are many points of diminishing returns where the extent you're going to make sure that those bottles are sanitized and would never in any way, like you can take any of this stuff too far.
Yeah.
And that part is really, really tricky, especially when you factor in the complexity that every household is different.
Mm.
The culture of the family, what there is this a multi-generational household? Are they international? Are they immigrants? Are they,
Mm.
cishet couple in the Midwest? Like they all have different frames. But when you start looking at that, at the avoidance, which I don't mean to pick on folks that have OCD, but it's in that presentation that I think it draws into the sharpest relief that it's very challenging sometimes to come up with what does the healthy just good enough look like
Mm.
instead of swinging for the fences and everything has to be perfect and taken to an extreme,
Yeah.
because that usually causes problems for the parent themselves and the relationship.
Yeah. Which is another effort to kind of mitigate what's coming up, right? Like
Yeah.
this pendulum swing. And I imagine in the work that you've done with folks is that has an impact on the relationship. That avoidance or that, the presentation of some OCD traits like can have really unhelpful ways of kind of showing up in their relationship with their partners.
I'm glad. Yes. So let's tease this out
Yes, please do.
a little bit. So, um, one of the key pieces of advice that I give people, which at first stance are like, huh, is don't make your life about your children. Invite your children into your lives.
Mm.
And the frame is very different,
Okay.
right? And the relational way that this plays out, if you think it's sort of like I'm thinking obviously I'm in Southern California, so we got all different kinds of family constellation. We got polycules and dual dads and so forth. But if we're talking about sort of like two parents and a child, um, in that context, it's very, very common for one or both parents to, instead of focusing on the leg of the triangle that goes between the parents and reflects their relationship, not
Mm.
just co-parental, but their relationship broadly,
Hmm.
and then the legs of the triangle that go to their baby, there's a great tendency to focus really heavily on the relationship with the baby and to let their relationship kind of wither. That seems like a nice to have, which is tough because most of the research in the area shows that the parent's relationship is the crucible within which their child's health, emotional and physical, develops.
Yeah.
And and now if we go even further on this, all right, I'm about to say a series of controversial things. Cut me off and be like, dude, like, what
Go
are you
for
doing to
it.
my listeners
Go for
here?
it.
Because most of the field is called maternal mental health, right? Except it's parental mental health. Like if we're
Mm-hmm.
my frame, that's why Jane and I
Mm-hmm.
named our book Parental Mental Health, factoring in the fathers. But we need to factor in parents of all genders,
Yes.
right? And so that's just one example of the broader point
Mm-hmm.
that fathers are either not important, or if fathers and typically a female identified parent, birthing parent, if they disagree, most of us believe, including the fathers themselves, she's right and he's wrong.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so the relational impact, when you put some of the stuff we've been talking about together, is you got this dad that wants to be more involved, doesn't quite have the models about how to do so, felt invisible, and might not be able to do the parenting of his baby in the way that's authentic for him.
Mm.
Then you've got a partner who is looking at what he's doing and it's stressful. It causes me anxiety. You're not washing the bottles the way that I want to. You're not holding the baby that I want to. You're not feeding in the way that I want to. And in the research literature, this is called gatekeeping, but it's more properly called maternal gatekeeping.
Mm-hmm.
Mind that, I've seen plenty of dads that worked on doing the same thing and had their own thing. So parents of any gender, but that's what it's called. And it is most
Yeah.
predominantly the mom that looks at her partner being like, no, man, like you got to get on my page or I'm going to be anxious, and back to avoidance. So the
Mm.
gatekeeping is basically avoidance by proxy. If what you, the father, are doing with my baby causes me anxiety, we both agree that I'm the one that knows better when we disagree. So I'm going to take that baby and make it so you can't do the thing that causes me stress.
So real.
Right? I mean,
Yeah.
this anybody who does this work
Yeah.
relationally or with couples, like this is such a common dynamic. It's almost like,
Mm-hmm.
a trope. But you see this one a lot. And so you got to look at the evolution of the fatherhood identity, some of the more traditional beliefs that we all have about who knows what, and then what the father. It's funny, like I'll get that, and sometimes the dad sitting in my office is like, man, my girlfriend, like, she never lets me like be the kind of dad that I want to, and it sucks. And by this point, they've like built up a lot of distance and damage and
Yeah.
resentment. And the dad will be like, so I'm just gonna take my kid and I'm gonna go to my parents' house for the weekend and I'll show her. And I'm like, bruh, hit
Mm.
pause. Here we are. Question number one. When was the last time you were alone with your baby for more than 15 minutes?
Mm.
And the answer is usually, well, I haven't, but it's cool. I'm like, so the weekend without permission, the kidnapping move, that's
Mm.
not really what's the next step here. Like the next step is we all come together, we talk about the relationship and anxiety and reality and basically set up what amounts to an exposure hierarchy,
Yeah.
right? She's taking a shower, you're on point with the baby. After the shower, the baby survived. Next time, I'm going to take the baby in the stroller around the block. This was all on me. Baby survived.
Mm.
I go run some errands, babies like, and
I
you
love
and you
this.
do this in a stepped way that's fair to everybody.
Yeah. And I love the baby survived, right? Because that is so key on bringing it back, right? Sometimes all the stuff, the emotions, the past, the experiences, the history of trauma, all the things and the dynamics that both are working with um are louder than
Mm-hmm.
the steps that need to be taken and will cause more challenges that then you have to go back and figure that out along with what
Mm-hmm.
originally led you there. So taking it back and really slowing it down and giving that scaffolding process a
Mm-hmm.
chance, right? I hear that. With the goal along the way is just the baby survived along the way, and you got to have more experience, more time, more trust, more all of that built in. But also, the mom is also really kind of checking her own sense of need anxiety and needing to have all of that kind of the control over the situation without that equal partnership.
It's funny. I go back. You're familiar with Eve Rodsky and Fair Play
Mhm.
and that approach. So one aspect I use that all the time, by the way, the Fair Play deck. And one of the aspects of that she's very straightforward about is if I have this card, if this is my responsibility,
Mm.
you don't get to comment on it.
Mm.
It is mine. And we're going to revisit this in a week. Now, part of what's hard about that is folks have really strong beliefs about if my baby's crying, it's traumatizing. Or if I'm not the perfect super mom, highly attuned in every way, then my
Mm.
baby is suffering. They won't have enough words. They won't go to TK early enough. Then it won't be the right preschool. They'll never get into Cornell, like this routine. And I'm like, there's so much
Yes.
plasticity within children and within family systems and just within a life experience. Like I get that. Like I have my own like background glow of anxiety that's lots of fun to deal with. And so I get that. But at the same time, being able to do some reality testing
Yes.
along those lines, I find goes a very long way.
Yeah. And I've been that mom where I was just like, my kid, and I have the knowing, I do the work, I support others. But when I had my own kid, my own stuff came up and I found myself being like, she can't cry. I can't, I gotta run to
Yeah.
her. And it took me time, and now I'm on my second kid and I'm like, he's all right, like he's
Maybe now it's time to
okay.
cry, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, definitely. I mean, he's not going to fall apart. Everything's not going to fall apart because a baby does what a baby does, which is communicate through crying and letting you know what's going on, right? And so that has reduced so much. But I hear you on, you know, we all have to reality check that. Um, and that includes both parents need to reality check what's coming up for them and figure out, like, how are we doing this together? Um, I wonder about a couple of things because, you know, I think tools are really important, and ways in which folks who may not have a whole bunch of time on their hands in the moment might be able to take something forward in the work that they're doing to support folks. So I think about the doctor or the nurse or the therapist or somebody who is supporting um, a family in the process of birthing or being pregnant or family planning along the spectrum of what this journey looks like. What is something, a tool that you find essential that they have?
So we made quick reference earlier to
Mm,
assessment,
yes.
screening. So ACOG, the American Academy of Pediatrics, I'm fairly certain like perinatology has the same.
Mm,
They talk about the need to do some level of mental health screening. Um, I'm fairly certain that pediatric American Academy of Pediatrics does include a nod to sort of parents of any gender and fathers, but like
mm,
top level, a lot of these clinics or providers use something like the patient health questionnaire 2 or the PHQ-9 or something,
mhm,
or they may use the Edinburgh postnatal depression scale, which absolutely has been validated with fathers. So because I do a good amount of consultation with clinics and hospitals and NICUs and whatnot, is let's first look at what you're already doing and see, does it make sense if this is what your protocols are with moms, does it make sense to just do the same thing with dads?
mm,
And in this case, when it comes to the screening part of it, yeah, it does.
mm,
Like if you whatever you use. Now you can get fancy if you want to start using um like the Gotland male depression scale, and you really want to sort of
mm,
dig in, you can. But your average pediatrician nurse, like, they have productivity requirements that preclude, let me give you a screen and then I'm going to score it and let's sit down and have a long conversation about that. And it's doing the screening and then knowing what the resources are. And one of the really, really key resources is Postpartum Support International.
mm,
I've worked with PSI for many, many years. I helped write the content on our website that's about fathers. We have a monthly dad's chat with an expert, lovely human being, my good friend Charles Schaefer, Dr. Chuck Schaefer. He's the one that's running that. We also have every Friday, there's a video support group that expectant dads, that new dads can
mm,
take part in. Also, we were talking before we started recording, for Postpartum Support International, for professionals. This could be administrators, this could be folks in mental health, this could be folks in ally like doulas, lactation consultants, nurses, and so
mm,
forth, that want to get more information about fatherhood and early fatherhood and father's mental health. I've developed a 2-day training called Foundations in Paternal Perinatal Mental Health that you referenced before, that I would I mean, that's 2 days. That's not like, oh, let me just pop
mm,
open a podcast or something. So that's more of a commitment. But that being said, you can go pretty deep um, and turn around. It's very concrete and applied. You also
mm,
mentioned my book with Jane,
mm,
Factoring in Fathers, parental mental health, factoring in fathers. And we wrote that. It's funny, Jane. I don't know if you've ever met Jane before,
mm,
but she is no joke. Like she founded PSI, and she basically showed up and was like, "Hey, Danny, we're writing a book. I can't do this one alone because I need a dad, and you're the dad's dude. So let's do this." And so we did. But my first response was, instead of a book, can we just make a pamphlet? right?
Okay.
I don't want some crazy long thing. And so we intentionally wrote the book so that it's quick, but
Mm,
it covers a lot of really important and every chapter boils down to putting it into practice. And so
mm,
looking at things like self-care, keeping the relationship strong,
mm.
tactical points about diapering and soothing and swaddling or social support, right? Like the onset of
Yeah.
parenthood tends to be an inflection point where men and fathers become more and more isolated. They try to get
Mhm.
all of their social support, all of their intimacy and connection needs met by their partner,
Mm.
and it never works. And it's funny, the old trope of like the nagging wife that's like, "Hey, why are you going out with your friends? Why don't you stay home?" And that I never see that. What I see
Mm.
are partners that are like, "Dude, go out with your friend, like go to the park, go bowling, go just do
Mm.
something." But they're just like, "Don't put it all." That is by far really
Wow.
what I see these days, much more so.
Huh. And I'm wondering and thank you for sharing those tools and also
Mhm.
the resources, because I'm wondering if someone's listening and they're a CSA or SV survivor and they're going to be a new parent or a parent for the second time and they're like, oh, that was my experience. And they're looking to um, take part in some of what you're speaking to. Would there be a place for them?
I'm not sure I understand.
Like would if someone's wondering, well, does that fit for me? Would that be a place where I can get what I need? Do you feel like it's trauma informed, fully accessible to folks who have a CSA background and have
Oh.
yeah.
You mean so for example, like the information and the training or the book or
Yeah.
postpartum support? Absolutely.
Okay.
Like doing trauma informed work is is necessary, particularly in this field, but not sufficient, right? We have to
Yeah.
come at this with a frame that says, I need to know you from your perspective first. And
Mm.
if part of your frame and your journey has been you're a trauma survivor, oftentimes the beginning of that work is let's come up with the words
Mm-hmm.
for what you've experienced. And yeah, certainly everybody that I just mentioned is very attuned to the role of trauma and abuse and neglect, but then also of strengths and
Mm-hmm.
resilience and all of the above. Um, that being said, they're good therapists, they're a bad therapist, right? Like
Yeah.
any other profession. And so, some folks are not going to index as much on, trauma or intersectionality or specific aspects of gender or ethnicity or whatever. And that can work. However, in this case, to do the repro perinatal stuff, I think being pretty acutely attuned to the impact of trauma, sexual violence, sexual assault
Mm.
is paramount. And so yeah, each of the
Yeah.
ones I was just talking about, absolutely. You're not gonna call into the PSI helpline and have somebody shame you for being a victim of sexual assault. That's not gonna happen.
I mean, that I think is so important for folks to hear because so often there are resources. They're like, "Oh, go here or connect here." But then folks come back with experiences of, this was okay, but not this piece of me. And so
Mhm.
I think it creates a sense of, I'm not sure I can go there. So for folks to hear, yes, the intersections of your identity, being male, being, a CSA survivor, an SV survivor, a new parent, all of these different pieces of yourself across the spectrum of what identity looks like is welcome in the resources that you shared. I wonder if there are any other resources that maybe are um, patient focused that you think would also be additional resources. You mentioned trainings that you offer, not just for professionals, but also for the new parents themselves. And folks can find out about that online. Is that right?
Yeah. So one thing you can do is you can go to our practice's website is we're the Center for Men's Excellence. Mind you, we see patients of all genders. It's not just men, although that's a lot of who we do see. We have plenty of resources. I've got the if you only see one, if you only get one book or baby gear or podcast or whatever. And so we've tried to, cleave through some of that. I also teach classes for expectant dads,
Mm.
and we teach them in person. It's every 2 months, and it alternates in person or virtual. And it's all about, like, it's funny that you can't market it to what we actually do, so it's a little bit of a bait and switch. If you're like, we're going to talk about relationships and stress and feelings, are like crickets. But if you're like, this is going to be tactical, we're going to talk about hands-on, soothing,
Mm.
swaddling, diapering, how do you hand the baby off and give you a shot of confidence to be involved, and blah blah blah, they're in. And then
Yeah.
when they're in the room, it turns out they're all worried about work-life balance, what's going to
Mm-hmm.
do to the relationship. Am I going to be a crap dad, my father figure wasn't around. So I think, this
Mm.
stuff just ends up coming out
Yeah.
fairly naturally in that context. So that's another, I think, cool resource that's pretty helpful. Another one, and this is a little random, but are you familiar with the cartoon Bluey?
Yes.
Okay. Bluey and the dad in that show, Bandit
Yeah.
Healer, is the official mascot of my research team. Like, we're all
Really?
Bandit head. And mind you, this came out in 2020, right? My kids are 20 and 18. They were not down with Bluey. Like, this is like my friends that have younger kids were like, dude, what would Bandit do? That's the question. Like, and so there
Yeah.
is a Facebook group called, like, Bandit or like Bluey Dads. Like, I can't remember exactly but I'm pretty sure it's like Bandit Fathers, whatever. It is one of the most supportive
Mm.
spaces online for fathers that I've ever seen.
Wow.
And it's tricky because doing the work that I do, there are all kinds of different factions at work, but certainly online, there's this sort of looming specter of the manosphere
Mm.
that is all about, like, men's rights and fathers' rights, and look how good girls and women and moms have it, and everybody hates men and so forth. And um, while I understand, of course, that there are pockets where men struggle and suffer and feel marginalized and so on, like the overall, like, society supporting women more than anybody else, like, just doesn't add up, right?
Mm. Mm.
Well, a lot of these spaces can get sort of misogynistic or just sort of like militant along those lines. And, like, okay, if that's your thing and that's your space, like, go do that. But that's not really what I'm endorsing. This Facebook group is, I'm convinced that the dads that are super into Bandit are just cool, not just because that makes me cool, right? But there's never any drama, there's never any piling on, there's never
Mm.
any, like, smack talking. And so for
Mm.
dads that are more comfortable in social media, there's Daddit, right? That's the dad focused, chunk of Reddit. And then there are a bunch of sub daddits about different, expectant dads, or children with special needs, or NICU dads, or like whatever the thing is. There are a bunch of them, and I'm
Mm.
aware of those, but I'm more familiar with the Facebook Bandits page, and I can recommend it without question. Totally
Yeah.
supportive, and run, don't walk if you're looking for, like, online dad support.
That's so great. And we're gonna link everything to make it just easy for folks to access, along with a link to your training and everything that we've mentioned, your book, so that folks have, you know, easy, clickable ways to continue connecting with all that you shared. Um, I always like to ask folks, for the survivors listening, is there anything that you think is important for folks to know, to hear?
Yeah, I mean, especially if you're someone who's in it right now, right? 1 in 10 dads gets postpartum depression.
Mm.
Nearly 20% of dads develop an anxiety disorder, right? And those numbers start to look fairly similar to moms when you start putting it all together. And so I'm talking to survivors, folks early in the survivor journey, folks who are in it with the PMAD right now. It's PSI's slogan: you're not to blame.
Mhm.
It's not your fault. And with the right kind of help, you'll get better. And I think it's important, the right kind of help. because there's shame and stigma out there about mental health. And there are also just a lot of myths about it. It's like an old white dude in a turtleneck with a clipboard and they don't give you anything or tell you anything. And
Mm.
sure, I mean, not to bag on the analysts out there, but folks that are in this kind of a situation with a PMAD, they're usually suffering and desperate.
Mm.
And we have very clear protocols that are well researched and evidence based and teach the person to manage their own issues over time, not
Mm.
just get you hooked on therapy or just keep asking you how do you feel
Mm.
about that. And so when I say the right kind of help, my bias is for folks that are struggling with PMADs and mental health issues to find folks that they connect with and who do evidence-based work that will ultimately give them the skills, the tools, the insight, the knowledge to better manage and not just survive, but thrive in their lives. That is feasible. You can do this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. My last question for you is there anything that I haven't asked that you feel is important to share?
I just want to like index a little bit more on the fact that dads get PMADs.
Mm-hmm.
Dads will develop depression. 10% of all postpartum dads will develop depression, not just you're kind of sad.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some really important elements of that when you do the men's issue stuff is oftentimes dads will men dads will manifest depression fairly differently than what we look up in the DSM. And so instead of like,
Mm.
vegetative and super emotional or won't get out of bed or like, crying in the corner, a lot of these dads show up with a depressive presentation that looks like they are really frustrated, irritated, angry, like on up into rage, like an agitated depression. Um, they tend to abuse substances. And so in the literature, they talk about like alcohol and drugs, but it's really any kind of like dopaminergic activity that gets the cerebral joy juice going. So it can be video games, it can be risky sex, it can be shoplifting, it can be
Mm.
all kinds of, but and a tendency to sort of move in that direction with traumatic coping. The third is somaticizing, right? There's certainly a gendered piece to this. I can't be depressed, but I can have a migraine or I can have stomach issues or feel like there's a weight on me. The fourth is they're isolated.
Mm.
And you can be isolated and be around people. You can live in a multi-generational household. You can work somewhere where you're in contact with people all the time, but you're not really engaging. And so I think it's critically important for folks to understand, there's that different way that fathers and men will oftentimes present with depression.
Mm.
And 10% of those dads that you're seeing or that may be partnered with the person that you're seeing
Mm.
are experiencing that. The number one strongest predictor of paternal postpartum depression is maternal postpartum depression. It is a stronger predictor of fathers developing postpartum depression than the father having a history, his own history of major depressive disorder.
Mm.
So if you assess someone, you give them that survey or that screen, and you're working with a birthing parent, and there's a partner, there's a dad at home, and they pop, they endorse item 10 on the EPDS or they get over 10 or whatever, there's a high likelihood, 10%, uh,
Mm.
50% likelihood that there's somebody at home, like 50% of the time when the gestational partner develops depression, so does the partner, so does the dad.
Yeah.
And the final piece about this is unlike moms, where we do the differential diagnosis between baby blues and MDD with peripartum onset right at 4 weeks, fathers' depressive symptoms tend to spike 4 to 6 months, three to
Mm.
five, 4 to 6 months postpartum.
Mm.
And for even seasoned clinicians, if you're seeing he's drunk all the time, he's pissed off, he's all like sullen and by himself, he's got headaches,
Mm.
and the birth was 6 months ago, what's he on about? Like they're not connecting it as a perinatal mood and anxiety issue. in part because they're not like we don't think about like fathers and postpartum, but it's very, very prevalent and it's very, very present. So
Mm.
those are, I think, really key aspects to consider as well.
So important. I mean, I met Dr. Singley when I was going through the PSI and policy center training, and I was blown away because there's so much as a clinician I was not taught as a trauma specialist. I was not taught about the ways in which men go through postpartum depression or can go through it. It was just not even in my it was just not a conversation. And
Hmm.
so, I highly recommend that folks, I'll second year recommendation that folks go through your training because it is eye-opening to be able to then practice holistically. If we say we're doing holistic work, we have to like walk that walk. And it's not when we're leaving somebody out of the conversation because we never learned that they needed to be in it in the first place. And they do. So I am so glad that we got to chat and that folks got to really learn about all of these different resources and about all that you're doing. And we're going to make sure that folks have access to all of the links to what you shared. But thank you so much, Dr. Singley, for joining Be the Bloom.
Thank you. It's an honor.
There was a lot shared today, and I want to encourage folks listening to connect with what resonated with you most. Consider one practice you can take from here and move into learning more about or even practicing if it feels appropriate to do so. If you would like to support the work of Cactus and Bloom to bring you these type of conversations and to do culture change work that builds skills, creates awareness, and improves equitable care for survivors of childhood sexual abuse and sexual violence in adulthood, consider a donation. Your contribution can make a world of difference. And together, let's see what blooms.